That almost sounds like the definition of a husband, Max said. Reckon so, Eli said. You think you can handle that? Think carefully before you answer. Remember, she's not like any creature you've ever met before. She may look like a young girl, but she's not, by a long shot. I know, Max said. Think about this, Eli said. If you decide to be her soulmate, you'll know love like you've never known before. She may not be there to make your dinner or wash your clothes every day, but she'll always be with you, in every way that truly matters. In a way, the fate of humanity could be in your hands. No pressure there, Max said sarcastically. Eli laughed. You sound like my grandson, he said. He slapped Max on the shoulder and stood up. There's no great rush. Take your time. Consider it carefully. I will, Eli, Max said. So where are you off to? There's a couple fellas down the street I need to have a chat with, he said with a wink. Don't worry, I'll be back. With that, he left the room. Shannon Burns and Jake Sylvester were sitting at their table in the restaurant of the Four Seasons, finishing their meal. She looked at her watch and saw it was 5:59 p.m. The instant her watch read 6 o'clock, she heard someone at her shoulder. Mrs. Burns, I presume, a female voice said. Shannon turned to see a young blonde woman standing at her side. She looked to be fresh out of college, if that. My God, Shannon thought, is Max robbing the cradle or what? No, he's not, the woman said with a sly smile on her face as she took a seat between Shannon and Jake. Not what? Shannon asked. Robbing the cradle, the young woman said. That's what you were thinking, wasn't it? How did she know that? Shannon asked herself. It doesn't matter how I know, the woman said, her smile widening. Jake looked between the two women, confused. His eyes took in the woman's pretty face, her smooth skin and soft, dough-like eyes. I'd love to get that between the sheets, he thought to himself. The young woman gave Jake an icy glare. No, you wouldn't, she said. Now it was Shannon's turn to be confused. Wouldn't? What? She asked the woman. Your boyfriend here thinks he'd like to get me in his bed, she said. Jake looked embarrassed as Shannon shot him an angry look. Let's get this done, the woman said. Shannon reached for her bag and pulled out an external hard drive. She handed it to the woman. Everything Max needs is here, Shannon said. The drive has been encrypted and the passcode is written on the bottom of the drive. We want to get regular updates on his progress. You'll hear from him when it's time, the woman said. Speaking of your husband, aren't you at all concerned about his condition? No, not particularly, Shannon said. He has a job to do, and if he's smart, he'll do it without asking a lot of questions. And just so you know, if he tries to email any of that information to anyone, like the authorities, the entire drive will be erased. And Max will end up in worse shape than he is now. Do you understand? Shannon put one hand on the young woman's wrist and squeezed for emphasis. I understand, the woman said. And if you don't take your hand off me, you won't live long enough to regret touching me. Do you understand me? A spark flew between Shannon's hand and the woman's wrist, and Shannon pulled her hand away quickly. I'll be leaving now. We'll be in touch. And do me a favor the next time you go out in public, keep your dog on a leash. She got up from the table, then reached in her pocket. One last thing, she said. Your husband said he has no further need of this. She tossed Max's wedding ring on the table. Good night. With that, she turned and left, leaving Shannon and Jake stunned. What the hell was that? Shannon asked. Jake shook his head and pulled out his phone as she put Max's ring in her purse. She felt a momentary twinge of guilt as she did so, but that passed quickly as she thought of getting her hands on his money. I don't know, but I want her followed, he said, dialing a number on his phone. Yeah, she just left, he said to the person on the other end of the call. Petite, blonde, good-looking. Be careful. He ended the call and put his phone away. So, were you really thinking about taking her to bed? Shannon asked, anger in her face. I'm sorry, he said sheepishly. I couldn't help it. Well, you'd better get your shit together, she said. A couple minutes later, his phone buzzed. He pulled it out and answered it. What do you mean? She disappeared, he asked. Find her. Whatever it takes. I want to know where she is. He ended the call and put his phone away. They lost her. Can you believe it? She turned a corner and was gone, he told Shannon. She smiled and pulled out her phone. Don't worry, there's a tracker inside the drive enclosure, she said. We'll know exactly where it is. She fired up her app, but her face turned red with anger after a couple minutes. She shut her phone off and put it away. What's wrong? Jake asked. Somehow, she disabled the tracker, Shannon said. I can't get a lock on anything. Can I help you fellas with something? The tall, lanky man asked as he came up to two large men in dark suits. He could easily see the pistols in their holsters under the jackets. Surprised by the appearance of the man, they instinctively reached for their firearms but were stopped by a voice behind them. "Don't even think of it," the male voice said. They turned to see a younger man in a cowboy hat holding a long rifle in one gloved hand. They moved their hands away from their pistols and held them out, palm forward. "Now what do you think these here fellers are doing out here in this dark alley, Amos? All dressed up like they's going to a hootenanny or something?" the tall man asked. "Who knows, Grandpa?" the younger man asked. "Why don't we ask, Em?" The tall, older man smiled and nodded his head. "Good idea, son," he said. "So what are you fellers doing out here this time of night dressed up like that? And carry in those big old shooting irons? None of you goddamn business, old man," one of the men said. "You hear the disrespect coming out of these fellers' mouths?" Eli asked. "Sure do," Amos said. Eli laughed and turned to the two men. "You know, I have a mind to top at you two over my knee and give you the whooping your daddy should have give you years ago," he said. "Just try it, old man," the other suit growled. Eli smiled, and before either of the men could react, he had the bigger of the two men across his knee, his trousers around his ankles. The other man started to react but thought better of it when Amos put the muzzle of his rifle in his face. As they watched, Eli brought his hand down on the first man's bare buttocks hard. He screamed when Eli hit him. But the tall man wasn't done yet. He gave the man 10 swats on the rear end and left him on the ground, crying. Eli looked at the other man. "Well, you gonna take your licks?" Eli asked. The man shook his head. "No, please, don't," he begged. Eli laughed and grabbed the man's pistol out of its holster. In seconds, he had the pistol disassembled and the parts strewn across the alleyway. He then grabbed the other man's pistol and did the same to it. "You know, I think you boys need to take a little nap," Eli said. He grabbed the man at the junction of his neck and shoulders and squeezed. The man's eyes rolled into the back of his head and he fell down, unconscious. Eli bent down and did the same to the other man, who quietly closed his eyes and went to sleep. "Damn, Grandpa," Amos said. "Where'd you learn to do that?" "Saw it on one of the television shows of yours a few days ago," Eli said. "Some guy with pointed ears did it and I thought I'd give it a shot. Figured it couldn't hurt." "You do know that was just a television program," Amos said. "That wasn't real. Those were actors following a script." "Now you tell me," Eli said. "Sure looked real on the television. How long you figure they'll be out?" Amos said. "Don't know," Eli said. "Reckon about a day or so, maybe. I squeezed extra hard to make sure. Maybe I should hang around to make sure they don't get back up," Amos said. "Nah," Eli said. "We'll be gone tomorrow. I don't think they'll be up before then. Even if they do wake up, they'll need to put their guns back together. Why don't you head on back to the hotel, spend the rest of the night with Danny?" "Okay," Amos said. "We're heading back home tomorrow after her meeting with Max's stockbroker. Let us know when you're back." "I will, son," Eli said. "Thanks." Amos turned and left the way he came. Eli took the time to smoke a cigarette before heading back to Max's room. That night, Max and Eli were watching television as Adresha walked in the room. She went to Max and gave him a kiss, which he returned. "Where's my kiss?" Eli said jokingly. "Lizzie would kick your bum if I kissed you, and you know it," she said with a smile. Max looked confused. "Who's Lizzie?" he wondered. Eli answered his question. "Lizzie is my wife, Elizabeth," he said. "And yeah, she would kick my bum." "Oh," Max said. He turned to Adresha. "So, how did it go? Did you get the information?" "Yes, I got it all," she said. "I've already disabled the tracker and then worked through the encryption on the files. And I got rid of the virus they put on the drive." "You did all that?" Max asked, shocked. "Of course," she said with a satisfied smile. "I told you I have doctorates in multiple disciplines and I can multitask as well. So, we're good to go with the plan, then?" Max asked. "Yes," she said. "I'll start going through this, and I'll make sure it just happens to get into the right hands." "How did Shannon react when you gave her my ring?" Max asked her. She felt a tiny bit of guilt for a moment, but her greed took over, she said. "She really doesn't care what happens to you, Max." "I'm sorry." Max nodded his head and felt his emotions rise again. Adresh just sat on the bed and kissed his forehead. He instantly felt better and looked into her face. "I just don't get it. Why would she do all this to me?" he asked. "All I've ever done is love her and support her. Did I do something wrong?" Adresh just shook her head. "You did nothing wrong, Max," she said. "Shannon is involved with some very bad people and they've twisted her mind and played on her greed. She's not the same woman you married. You're not having second thoughts, are you?" "No," he said. "Even if I thought I could get past the cheating, which I can't, The fact is I could never trust her again. You should also know that they intend to kill you no matter what, Adresh just said. Shannon figures that's the only way she can get her hands on your money. She knows she'll get nothing in a divorce. And you saw all this in her mind? Max asked. I did, she said. I had seen it before and hoped it was just a fleeting thought. But it wasn't. She's set on seeing you dead, one way or another. What will we do? Max asked nervously. We follow our plan, she said. Look at me, she said, firmly, taking his head in her hands. Look me in the eye and listen to my words. Think of nothing else. He did as she directed. No hand raised against you will ever prevail, my love. You must finish what we started. You are my chosen, and I will see you through this. Do you understand? He felt his resolve stiffen and nodded his head. I understand, he said. Drink some tea and get some rest, she told him. You'll need it. I'll be by to see you off in the morning. Thank you, Max said. For everything. She stroked his face for a moment. Sweet dreams, she said with a smile before leaving. He poured another cup of tea and sipped it as he watched television with Eli for a bit. When he finished, he laid back in the bed. If you don't mind, I'm going to get some sleep, he told the older man. You can keep watching the TV if you want. It won't bother me. Reckon I just might do that, Eli said as Max nodded off to sleep. As Eli watched television, Max's mind was filled with dreams. When he woke up the next morning and saw Eli was still watching television. Didn't you get any sleep last night? He asked. Eli shook his head. Don't need to sleep anymore, he said. I take it you had a good night's sleep. Max smiled as he recalled his dreams, which seemed so vivid. Oh yeah, he said. Eli smiled as though he knew what was going through Max's mind. The nurses came and took Max for his morning x-rays and exams. A few minutes after he was back, the doctor showed up and gave him the good news. Well, Max, it looks like you're completely healed, he said. I see no reason to keep you here. I'll go ahead and start the process and we'll have you ready to go in just a short bit. That's great, Doc, Max said. Thanks. By the time Max finished his breakfast, Adresha came into the room. I hear you're getting discharged, she said. I am, Max said. No offense, but I'm ready to get out of here and back on my feet. No offense taken, she said. She turned to Eli. I understand you ran into a couple of Mario's goons last night. Yeah, Amos and I took care of him, he said. She nodded her head. Well, their boss isn't too happy with them right now, she said. That's their tough luck. She reached into her briefcase, pulled out an envelope, and handed it to Max. There's 2 tickets to Spokane, one for you and another for Eli. I got round-trip tickets for you both, but something tells me Eli won't need the return ticket. There's also some new ID cards in there for you, just in case. Danny and your attorney will be working with the stockbroker after they see Judge Stone this morning. Basically, everything is set to go. Wow, you have been busy, Max said. What about Mario's books? Did you have a chance to look at any of that information? Oh yes, she said. There's evidence of a multitude of crimes there. Guns, drugs, prostitution, graft, pay-for-play, you name it. And it looks like a number of elected officials across the country are involved as well. No wonder they couldn't get anyone to look at them. I'm sorting through it all, but it'll take some time. So, how are you feeling? You look well rested. I feel better than I have in a long time, Max said. And yes, I am well rested. Thank you. I'm glad to hear that, she said. And just so you know, she whispered in his ear, that was just a small taste of what's in store for you when this is all over. You mean, Max began before she silenced him with a kiss. Oh yes, that was very real, she said after she broke the kiss. I hope you enjoyed it. Oh my, Max said. He could still see her in that forest, giving herself to him completely. Hang on to that, she said. And don't worry. I'll write you every week, and I promise you'll see me every night. Write me. Max said. What do you mean? Well, the rules at Camp Rollins are quite clear, she said. No phones, no internet. Only what you would call snail mail. I'll make sure you have an address where you can reach me. And remember, your name is Bunich, not Burns. Burnage, Max said. Got it. One more thing, Max, she said. I know you've been through Air Force boot camp. Trust me, this is a lot worse than that. Terrific, Max said. She smiled and shook her head. Don't worry about it, she said. You'll do just fine. You're a lot stronger than you give yourself credit for. There's an inner strength you've never tapped into before. That's not your fault. You've just never had to do that before. Trust me, you'll have to do this yourself, but I'll be right there with you. When you feel your strength starting to wane, think of me. Will you do that? I will, Max said. Good. Listen, they're getting ready to bring your discharge papers, so I'll have to get going, she said. And remember what I told you. I will, he said. She started to turn away, but Max stopped her. What about my luggage? Don't I need to take some things with me? No, Adresha said. They'll have everything you need. Oh, okay, Max said. He looked into her face for a moment before he spoke again. I love you, Adresha, he said before kissing her. And I love you too, Max, she said when they broke apart. She smiled at him one last time and left the room. After she left, he pulled out his clothing, which had been washed, and returned to the small wardrobe in the room. Making sure he had everything, he got dressed. By then, a nurse came into the room with his discharge papers and a wheelchair. She went over everything with him and had him sign the papers when she was finished. What's the wheelchair for? He asked. That's for you, she said. Hospital policy. We don't want you getting hurt by accident on your way out. That makes sense, Max said, sitting down in the chair. The nurse wheeled him to the patient loading area, Eli following close behind. They got to the curb and the nurse hailed a cab. She helped him get inside, even though he didn't really need any help, and Eli got in the other side. Where to? The driver asked after the door was closed. Airport, Max said. He looked at the tickets to find out what airline they would be flying on. American Airlines Terminal, please. You got it, the driver said, heading out. After they got to the terminal, Max realized they had a couple hours before they needed to check in. Care for a beer before we have to go? It's on me, he offered. Why sure, Eli said. Let's go find us someplace to park. They found a small bar inside the terminal and ordered a beer. Max said, I appreciate that. So, what do you know about this camp? I know it's pretty tough, Eli said. You ever deal with anyone who's been through it? Max asked. Once or twice, Eli said. You don't think I'm up to this, do you? Max asked. Well, I think you got the heart for it, and I think you have the brains for it, Eli said. But I look like someone who spent 10 years sitting on his bum behind a keyboard all day, Max said. That's because for the most part, I have. I've put on some weight, and I've gotten soft. I get that. I've been meaning to hit a gym, but I just haven't had time to do it. You think maybe that's why Shannon's doing what she's doing? Don't rightly know, son, Eli said. Could be. Maybe she sees you as someone she can push around because you've let her. Personally, I think it's mostly because she's greedy and she's let some a-hole fill her head with a bunch of crap. No argument there, Max said. We know she's after your money, Eli said. How much are we talking about? A lot, Max said. Somewhere north of $10 million. Eli whistled. How'd you get all that? He asked. I've been fascinated with numbers and economics for years, Max said. My dad was a whiz on the stock market, and he taught me everything he knew. I learned the value of saving and investing at an early age. He opened a custodial account with his broker for me when I was 14. I started small, made some mistakes along the way, but I learned from them. By the time I was 18, I was worth $500,000. I kept at it while I was in the Air Force, and by the time I went to college, I had over $5 million. It's doubled since then. No wonder she's so anxious to get her hands on it, Eli said. When Shannon and I got married, my broker suggested I get a prenuptial agreement, so my attorney put one together. Shannon was livid, but I got her to understand this was just to protect what I'd spent so long building up, Max said. My goal was to put whatever children we had through college, set them up, and be retired by the time I was 55. Guess she got tired of waiting. Reckon so, Eli said. So, what advice do you have for me regarding this camp? Max asked. For starters, you've got an edge most of the guys who go to that camp don't, Eli said. Most of them fellers are scared, alone, humiliated, weak. They don't have the support you do. They go in looking like scared rabbits, and they come out mean as hell with a chip the size of Texas on their shoulders. Not all of them, but enough of them are like that. They got it in their heads all they have to do is kick someone's bum and their problems are over. They lash out without thinking, and sometimes they end up in more trouble than they had going in. Basically, you're saying I need to learn to pick my fights, Max said. I get that. It's a bit more than that, but you're on the right track, Eli said. Adresha and I can help you hone those skills so you're not a loose cannon out there tearing up everything in sight. Let them build you up physically, teach you what you need to know, but you need to remember one very important thing. What's that? Max asked. No matter how big and bad you think you are, there's always someone bigger and badder than you, Eli said. You're not bulletproof, like me. After all, I'm already dead. I can't be killed twice. Good point, Max said quietly. Eli chuckled and slapped Max on the shoulder. Don't worry, you'll do fine, he said. They finished their beer and cigarette and noticed it was time to get in line for the security check. They had no luggage, which surprised the security agent, and went through the detector without a hitch. Soon, they were in line to board the aircraft. They found their assigned seats and sat down. Max was placed in a seat next to one of the windows. Eli sat in a middle seat and looked a bit nervous. "First time flying?" Max asked. "First time on one of these flying machines," he said. Max thought that a strange phrase. "Normally, I'm on horseback." "Horseback?" Max asked. Eli nodded his head. "Yeah," he said. "I'll tell you about it someday." "I can't wait to hear about that," Max said. "Trust me, these things are safer than just about any other means of transportation. Besides, even if we do crash, you don't have to worry, right?" "Technically, no, but that don't mean I like the idea of falling from hundreds of feet in the air," Eli said. "Try thousands of feet," Max said. "These things get pretty high." "That makes me feel better," Eli said. Max smiled at that. Soon, the flight attendants were walking around, making sure everyone was belted in. Eli had some difficulty figuring it out and Max helped him. After one of the flight attendants gave her safety spiel, she sat down and the aircraft began its journey to the runway. They sat there for a minute or two and suddenly, the aircraft began its takeoff. As it lifted off the runway, Max heard a quiet, "Oh, shit," from Eli's seat and smiled to himself. As the aircraft reached its cruising altitude, Max looked and saw that Eli had relaxed a bit and was looking out the window. "You okay?" he asked the older man. "Yeah, this ain't so bad," Eli said. "I told you," Max responded. "If you don't mind, I'm gonna get a bit of sleep." "Okay," Eli said, looking out the window. A bit more than 3 hours later, the plane landed in Spokane, Washington, and they followed everyone else off the plane. Eli stayed with Max outside the terminal, and the two enjoyed one last cigarette as they waited for the bus that would take Max to Camp Rollins. Finally, the bus arrived and a stocky man in a khaki uniform stepped out of the vehicle. "You heading for Camp Rollins?" he asked as he approached Max and Eli. "Yes, I am," Max said. The man nodded his head. "Go ahead and finish your smoke, then get on board," the man said. "Okay," Max said. They finished their cigarettes and shook hands after crushing out the butts. "You take care now," Eli said. "Remember what we told you, and you'll do just fine. I'll be back to get you when you're finished." "Thanks for everything," Max said. Eli nodded his head, tipped his hat, then turned and walked back into the terminal. Max saw a few others get on the bus, so he joined them. "Oh, my God," the man in uniform yelled as he gazed at the small group of men standing on yellow footprints painted on the parking lot asphalt. "How in the hell do they expect me to make men when they won't even send me human beings to start with? This is the sorriest collection of illiterate cum bubbles I have ever seen in my entire life. Christ on a bicycle." He spoke to another man in uniform. "Get this sorry-ass bunch of maggots out of my sight and get them processed before I start cussing." "Yes, sir," another man wearing sergeant's stripes said. As the sergeant turned to the group of about 15 men, Max wondered what the hell he had gotten himself into. These guys seemed far more severe than the military training instructors he had at Lackland Air Force Base in San Antonio. "Turn to the right," the sergeant barked. They all faced to their right except for one skinny kid who turned to his left. The sergeant was instantly all over him like white on rice. "What are you, an idiot? Do you not even know the difference between right and left?" The sergeant screamed in the kid's face as he bounced the wide brim of his campaign hat off the kid's face. "This is your right," the sergeant screamed, stomping on the kid's right foot. "And this is your left," he added, stomping on the kid's left foot. "Now, turn to your right," the sergeant ordered. The kid faced to the right, looking embarrassed. "Forward, move," the sergeant barked. Everyone started walking forward, following the sergeant's direction. When they reached what he realized was the processing center, the sergeant issued another order. "Hippity-hop, mob, stop." Everyone stopped except for one guy who took an extra step. "God damn it, I said stop. When I say stop, you stop. Understand me, maggot?" the sergeant screamed in his face. Before the man could respond, the sergeant walked away and opened the door to the building. He ordered the group inside and watched as they received their bus haircut, then took them to the clothing and equipment issue area. There, the students, as they were called, gave up all their personal items, clothing, wallets, jewelry, everything was tagged, inventoried, and placed in a locked container. They were even required to remove the batteries from their phones and give those up as well. They were then issued 2 sets of olive green overalls, several pair of white t-shirts and boxer shorts, socks, tennis shoes, boots, caps, and a bag filled with toiletries. The sergeant gave them just a few seconds to shower, shave, and don their new uniforms. Once finished, he instructed them to form up outside, where he explained the rules, which were simple. They were not to speak unless spoken to. They would run wherever they went and were to follow whatever instructions they were given without question. He double-timed them to another small building, which they learned was their barracks, their home for the next 3 months. They were set loose and told to find their designated racks, the term that was used for their beds, and stow their gear in footlockers located at the foot of the small twin-sized beds. That night, Max slept soundly, dreaming of a particular blonde goddess. Shannon was clearly angry as she looked at her phone. Jake saw the anger in her face and approached her. "What's wrong?" he asked. "He's gone," she said. "I can't find him anywhere. I called the hospital and they told me he had been discharged and had already left. I know I put a tracker on his phone, but it doesn't seem to be working. Maybe he turned it off or blocked you," Jake said. "The GPS should still be able to track his phone," she said. "Where is he?" "Don't worry, we'll find him," Jake said. "You'd better," she said, her face red. "There's $10 million on the line and I can't afford to lose him. Not now." The first month of camp was rough on Max, but he expected it. They ran everywhere, up and down steep hills, through obstacle courses that included rope climbs into tall trees, and to the gym, where they worked out with weights until their arms could hardly move. They were given exercises that made little sense to him at the time. These workouts took place every day from 5 a.m. until 6:30 p.m. That was the time they returned from dinner and were allowed to have one cigarette in a formation outside their barracks. Max couldn't help but notice that the partial pack Eli gave him never seemed to be empty. He wondered about that, but didn't dwell on it. Where Eli and Adresha were concerned, nothing surprised him anymore. The only other break the students got was on Sundays. Those who wished went to church. The rest were given jobs around the camp, mowing the grass or washing laundry. That was also the day they were allowed to write letters. Some wrote to their wives, while others wrote to their children. Max would write Adresha, telling her how much he missed her and updating her on his progress. He thought it was a bit silly, since he was certain she already knew what was happening to him. Still, it felt good to put pen to paper and express himself to her. He responded to the letters he received from her, which he treasured. He loved reading her carefully crafted calligraphy, which looked like an art form unto itself. He could even detect her scent on the paper she used. She kept him up to date on her progress with Mario's books and what was happening with Jake and Shannon. Like the other students, a private investigator kept tabs on Shannon's activities and filed weekly updates complete with pictures. She was a very busy girl from what he gathered, and not just with Jake. But unlike the PI, Adresha was able to record Shannon and Jake's thoughts and plans. She was able to record the two of them in places the PI couldn't. Of course, he had no way of watching any videos, so Adresha kept those on file for him in case he wanted to look at them later. He really didn't want to, but realized he might have to at some point in the future. As time went on, he realized that Eli was right about her. Yes, she was immortal, a goddess with abilities and knowledge he was barely beginning to fathom. But at the same time, she was very much a real woman. The more he read her letters, and the more time he spent with her in his dreams, the more he found himself falling madly in love with her. The first month of camp ended soon enough, and Max found that he had lost the flab that had gathered around his midsection. He also found that his muscle tone had improved considerable, and while he felt tired, he seemed to have more energy than before. The second month of camp began with the class telling their sad tales of cuck. He listened as they spoke and realized he didn't have it nearly as bad as some of the others. When his turn came, he told them about the night he was ambushed, drugged, tied to a chair, cuckolded, and beaten. He didn't mention Adresha or Eli, but simply said he got help from two close friends. The counselor, a Dr. Deborah White, listened intently as he told his story, taking notes. "Your case doesn't seem quite as bad as the others, Max," she said as he finished. "I can't help but wonder why you're here." "My friend said it would do me good," Max said. "Do you feel like it's helping so far?" she asked. "I do," he said. "For starters, I've gotten rid of that spare tire around my gut," he added to laughter. "And I'm feeling more confident than I have in quite some time." She nodded her head. "Okay, Max," she said. "We'll talk more in private later." Next. The physical training continued, and the curriculum now included psychological counseling. He found some of it useful, but a lot of it was psychobabble to him. Adresha confirmed that to him several times in his dreams. Meanwhile, Shannon and Jake were beside themselves trying to get a lock on Max's location. Shannon was even more concerned, given that she had never been away from her husband for more than a few days at a time. She thought it odd that she never heard from him. No texts, no calls, no emails, nothing. Nevertheless, all their bills were being paid and she received a weekly stipend, which she spent on food and other things she needed. She began to wonder if maybe Jake and Mario had taken him out. She broached the subject to Jake a couple times, but he shut her down. As for the updates on Mario's books, all they received were anonymous emails saying they were being processed. When they tried responding, all they got were error messages saying the address they attempted to contact did not exist. What they didn't know is that enough information had already been forwarded to certain agencies who were preparing to make some big arrests. Max finally got to the 3rd month of his training and found that he enjoyed the close combat and self-defense training he received. Of course, the physical training and psychological counseling continued. They also offered him free legal help, but he turned that down since he already had an attorney working his case. Then came the BTB, or Burn the Witch ceremony, which marked the end of their training. The instructors gathered them outside after dinner around a pole that had a pile of wood around it. A straw figure lay on the ground next to it. When I give the command, take one photo of your spouse and pin it to the figure, their senior instructor commanded. Ready? Move. They all pulled a photo of their spouse and pinned it to the figure. All Max had was a photo he got from the PI that showed both Shannon and Jake. He stabbed a pin through Shannon's face, securing the photo to the figure. Not the figure, the instructor ordered. They picked up the straw effigy and tied it securely to the pole. Finish. Front and center, the sergeant ordered. Max stepped in front of the sergeant, who handed him a lit torch. He grabbed the torch with both hands and held tight. Burn the witch, the sergeant ordered. Sir, burn the witch. Aye, sir. Max shouted in response. He walked to the pile of wood below the straw effigy and set it on fire. The flames licked up, catching the straw figure on fire. Burn, 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 they all chanted as flames devoured the straw figure. The photos quickly curled up and burned to ash. Burn, 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 the men shouted, pumping their fists in the air. They continued to chant and pump their fists in the air. The chants turned into howls and angry growls as the figure burned. The men sounded more like wild animals than human beings as they howled. Soon, the figure fell off the pole and burned as it lay on the ground. The sergeant gave everyone a beer from a chest at his feet, and they celebrated the end of their training. Max joined several others and lit up a cigarette to go with his beer. That night, as he lay in bed asleep, Adresha joined him in his dreams, as she had every night since he arrived. That was quite a ceremony, she said as he lay in her arms. How did it make you feel? Like a weight has been lifted off my back, he said. Well, I'm glad it helped, she said. The last thing I want is to compete with memories of an ex-wife. He chuckled. You have nothing to worry about, dear, he said. I must say I like what they've been able to do with you, she said. Physically as well as mentally. I feel like a new man, he said. And I owe it all to you. No, my love, she said. You had it in you all along. All I did was help you realize it. I couldn't have made it through this without you, he told her. And truth be told, I can't imagine ever being without you. I told you, my dear sweet man, I love you. And I'll always be here for you. Always, she said. He looked at her before continuing. I love you so much, Adresha, he said. And I love you too, Max, she said. I'll always love you. Well, tomorrow is the big day, he said. We graduate tomorrow. I know, she said. Eli will be there to fly back with you. You should know that Shannon and Jake plan to be at your house tomorrow. They'll have some of Mario's guys there as well. They intend to track you down and kill you unless you provide the work they think you've been doing. The FBI has already brought in several high-powered figures for questioning, and Mario is convinced you somehow provided the evidence. There's going to be a lot of people arrested over the next few days. What do you suggest we do? Max asked. This is your show, remember? She asked. You need to handle this. We'll back you up, but you have to do the heavy lifting. I'm going to give you something that I think will help you. Lay back and close your eyes. Max did as she said and felt a warmth go through his head as she took his head in her hands. He felt a strange tingling in his brain and saw flashes of light in his mind's eye. He sat up when she was finished. What did you do? He asked. I gave you a little gift, she said. I call it a command voice. You can use it to control any mortal. How do I use it? He asked. Just focus on the command and give the order, like your instructors did here at the camp, she said. Use it wisely. And don't forget what I told you earlier. No hand raised against you will prevail. Think of me as your armor. Okay, he said. Damn it, he thought to himself as his eyes flew open. That always happened to him. He got up and followed the rest of the class into the head where he showered, shaved, and got ready for the day. After getting dressed in freshly laundered jeans and denim shirts, the class went to breakfast, retrieved the stuff they turned in, then formed up for the graduation. The camp commander and the senior instructor stood before them. "You men have come a long way since you arrived," the camp commander said. "You came here, scared, uncertain about your future, defeated and humiliated by the ones you love the most. Now, you've gotten your manhood back. You look like men with the confidence to take on the world. You have the tools and the wherewithal to take on and successfully complete whatever you set out to do. I wish the best for each one of you. Remember, we're here for you 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. If you need anything at all, even someone to talk to, we're here for you. Now, go and take on the world." Their senior sergeant stood in front of the class. "Class, attention. Dismissed." The men hooped as they picked up their bags and headed to the bus, stopping to shake the sergeant's hand. Many of them gathered before entering the bus to exchange contact information, promising to stay in contact with each other. When they got to the airport, Max saw Eli waiting for him in the terminal. Eli smiled as he held out a hand. "You look good, Max," he said. "I see 3 months in the fresh air have done wonders for you." "Thanks, Eli," Max said. "It's good to finally be able to go home." They checked in and boarded the plane. After they took their seats, Eli turned to Max. "You should know that Shannon, Jake, and some of Mario's boys are at your house," he said. "Amos is with the private investigator keeping an eye on things. I'm told there's some sheriff's deputies with them." "Yeah, Adresha told me they'd be there," Max said. Eli nodded his head. "You gonna be able to handle this?" Eli asked. Max took a deep breath and let it out slowly. "I think so," he said. "I just need to get some sleep." "Okay, partner, y'all just get some rest," Eli said. Max nodded his head and was asleep before the plane reached altitude. When the plane landed, Max woke up and saw Eli reading a magazine. "Sleep well?" Eli asked. "Yeah," Max said, stretching his arms. "I'm ready to get this done." Eli nodded his head and the two of them stood up with the other passengers leaving the aircraft. Not having any luggage, the two of them went outside and flagged down a cab. Before they got in, though, a young man on a skateboard came zipping down the sidewalk, bowling over a woman pushing a baby stroller. "Hey, you," Max ordered. The teenage boy on the skateboard stopped and turned to Max. "Are you talking to me?" the teenager asked. Max took in the ring he wore in his nose and upper lip. "Yeah, you," Max said. "Get over here and apologize to this woman. Now," he ordered. He noticed a slight vibration in his voice when he gave the order and fully expected the kid to give him a bunch of crap. But he didn't. Instead, the kid got off his skateboard, picked it up, and walked to the woman he had knocked over. "I'm sorry, ma'am," he said sheepishly. "I wasn't looking where I was going. Are you all right?" "Yes, I am," she said. "Didn't you see the signs? There's no skateboarding on this sidewalk. You could have hurt my child." "I'm really sorry," the teenager said. He looked at Max. "I didn't see the sign, honestly." "You see it now, right?" Max asked. The kid nodded his head. "Yes, sir, I do," he said. Max nodded his head. "And you'll obey them from now on, won't you?" Max asked. "Yes, sir, I will. I promise," the kid said. "All right," Max said. "You'd better." As he watched, the kid turned and walked the way he was going. He looked at the woman, who was checking her child. "Are you all right, ma'am?" he asked. She looked at him and nodded her head. "We're both fine," she said. "Thank you." Max nodded his head. "You're welcome, ma'am," he said. "You have a nice day now." The woman smiled and walked on. Stunned, Max got into the cab, with Eli following. Max gave the driver his destination, then turned to Eli. "Did you see that?" he asked. Eli nodded his head. "I did," Eli said. "Good job. Just don't let it go to your head." Max chuckled at that. Eventually, they made their way to Max's house, which sat on a 5-acre wooded lot on the edge of town. They came upon a pickup that Eli recognized. He asked the driver to pull over for a second. The driver pulled over and Amos came to the cab. "There's 4 fellas inside with Mrs. Burns and her lawyer friend," he said. "Process server and sheriff's deputies are here with arrest warrants for all of them." "Okay," Eli said. "Follow us inside." Amos nodded his head and walked back to the deputies on the other side of the road. Eli gave the signal for the driver to pull into Max's property. Max paid the driver with his credit card and got out of the vehicle. Eli got out on the other side. He directed the others to follow close behind him and waved the cab driver off. After the cab left the property, Max, Eli, Amos, the process server, and 2 deputies went to the front door while a 3rd deputy went behind the house to enter from the back door. Max opened the door and walked in. The 4 goons turned and began to pull out their weapons, but Max stopped them. Freeze, he ordered. The four men instantly stopped what they were doing. Sit. And keep your hands where we can see them, Max ordered. Everyone obeyed, much to the deputy's surprise. Max turned to the process server and nodded his head. The process server walked to Shannon. Are you Ms. Shannon Burns? He asked. She nodded her head. Answer him, Max ordered. Yes, I'm Shannon Burns, she said. The process server handed her an envelope, which she accepted. You have been served, he said before stepping back. Shannon looked inside the envelope and didn't seem surprised to find a set of divorce papers. Sign the papers, Max ordered. Shaking, Shannon accepted a pen from Jake and signed the papers before handing them back to the server. I'll get this back to your attorney, he said quietly. Max nodded his head. Now, you are all going to be arrested and taken to jail, Max said quietly. When you get there, you will all confess your crimes, all of them. You will sing like canaries and then throw yourselves on the mercy of the court, and you will accept whatever punishment you are given. Do you understand? But Mario will have us killed, Jake whined. Please, have mercy on us. Mercy? Max asked. You mean like you had on me? Screw you. You're lucky to be alive right now. That's as much mercy as I'll grant you. If Mario decides to take you out, that's your problem, not mine. He turned to the deputies. Take them away, he said quietly. As Max, Eli, and Amos watched, the deputies took them all into custody, reading them their rights. Shannon looked at Max as she was being cuffed. What happened to you? She asked. You happened to me, Max said. And for the record, Maxwell Burns no longer exists. What? She asked. Then who are you, really? Max Burnage, he said in a tone of voice that sent chills up and down her spine. The deputies took them out of the house and loaded them in their cars. They watched as the police cruisers left the property. Eli slapped Max on the shoulder. Good job, son, he said. Max shut the door as they turned back inside and was shocked to see Adresha standing in the front room. She had a smile on her face as she wrapped her arms around Max. I agree, she said, although I am a bit surprised you let her live. I thought hard about that, Max said. I know, she said. Why did you spare her life? A couple reasons, Max said. First, I didn't want her death on my conscience. Second, I figured her suffering is just beginning. Something tells me she won't last too long behind bars. Adresha nodded her head in approval. You were right, Eli, she said. He does have the heart for this. There's just one thing left to do, she added. Mario? Max asked. Yes, she said, pulling out her tablet. He's meeting with his attorney in New York even as we speak. She showed him the tablet. He saw Mario sitting on his pool desk with a well-dressed man, discussing the federal case against him. He saw the thought monitor at the bottom of the video. I'm going to have that Maxwell Burns drawn and quartered for what he's done, Mario thought as the attorney spoke. How would you like to crash his little party? Adresha asked. Max looked at her, his curiosity piqued. And how would we manage that? He asked. Adresha smiled and took one hand in hers. Follow me, she said quietly. We'll be back shortly, she told Eli and Amos. She turned back to Max. I'll be with you, but they won't see me. Follow your heart and do what you think is right. Max nodded his head. Now, take one step with me. He followed her lead and found himself on Mario's pool deck. He looked to his right, where Adresha was before they left his living room. He could discern her outline, but knew they couldn't see her. He turned back to Mario and his lawyer, deep in conversation. He cleared his throat to get their attention. They looked at him, stunned. Who are you? Mario asked as he stood up. Yes, the lawyer said. Speak up, man. Who are you, and how did you get here? Don't you recognize the accountant you wanted to do your books? You really should know who you're doing business with, Mario, Max said. What? Mario asked. What are you talking about? I'm the guy Jake and Shannon told you about, Max said. Oh, so you're the accountant who double-crossed me, Mario said. Do you know who you're dealing with? Do you realize I can have you taken out with a single call? Max chuckled. The real question is, do you know who you're dealing with? Max said. Mario took a step back. He wasn't used to people standing up to him. He considered his options before speaking. All right, Mario said. You've got my attention. Now, tell me what I need to do to make things right with you. You do know that even if the feds come after me, I'll never spend a minute behind bars. My lawyers will keep the courts tied up in knots for years. So, tell me what it is you want. Money? I got lots of it. Women? I've got more than I can shake a stick at. You can have some of it, as much as you want. Just name your price. Max felt his face turn red with anger. Deep down, he knew that Mario was right. Even though he deserved to spend the rest of his life in prison, he knew Mario's attorneys would fight tooth and nail to keep him out. And he would be free to ruin more lives and free to prosper off the ruin he left behind. There was nothing remotely redeeming about this creature, and Max knew he had to be eliminated. "There's only one thing you can do that would satisfy me," Max said. "Name it," Mario said. "Anything." Max smiled, but there was no warmth in his smile. "Drop dead," Max commanded. Mario began to smile, but the smile faded and he brought a hand to his chest. He gasped for air, but was unable to breathe. He looked at Max one last time before his eyes rolled up. He fell to the concrete, his eyes glazed over in death. The lawyer looked at Max, shocked. "Who are you?" he asked. "Max Spinach," Max told him. "And as far as you're concerned, I don't exist. I was never here. Understand?" "Yes, I understand," the lawyer stammered. "Good," Max said. "Now, go to sleep. And when you wake up, you won't remember a thing." The lawyer dropped to the concrete, his eyes closed in a deep slumber. Max felt a warm hand in his and found himself standing in his front room, Adresha next to him, a wide smile on her face. "Did I do okay?" he asked nervously. She wrapped her arms around his neck and kissed him deeply. "Yes," she said when she broke the kiss. "More than okay, my avenging angel." "So, I take it our services are no longer required here tonight," Eli said. "No, Eli. I have it under control," Adresha said. "But remember your promise. To know you're a mortal man with all the desires that come with it. And I know you may be tempted from time to time, but I'll always be here, in your heart, and I'll help see you through those temptations." "I can't believe all this is happening to me," he said. "Your life will definitely be different from here on out, Max," she said. After 15 long days in a coma, Max finally regained consciousness. As he blinked his eyes open, the sterile hospital room came into focus around him. Confusion swirled in his mind as he tried to piece together what had happened. Fragments of memories danced at the edges of his consciousness, but nothing seemed solid or real. The realization dawned on him. Everything he had experienced during his coma was nothing but a dream. The vivid images of his wife's infidelity, the searing pain of cheating, and the burning desire for revenge had all been products of his subconscious mind. Determined to confront his wife and take revenge, Max pushed himself upright in the hospital bed. Weakness still coursed through his limbs, but his resolve burned bright. He knew that confronting his wife would require both physical and mental strength he was determined to find. With each passing day, Max focused on his recovery with a singular purpose. Physical therapy sessions became his battleground, each exercise a step closer to regaining his strength. He pushed himself harder, driven by the purpose to take revenge. It took 20 more days to recover. Now it's time for retribution. Dear listeners, we will come up with a follow-up story soon. Please share your thoughts in the comments section below and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.